Homeless girl says, "If I translate this, will you give me shelter?" The millionaire laughs, but she silences him. Before we dive into this powerful story of transformation and redemption, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. This tale will touch your heart in ways you never expected. Enjoy the story. The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of the 52nd floor as Benjamin Hartwell stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corporate tower. At 45, he commanded an empire worth $800 million, but his heart had grown as cold as the steel and glass that surrounded him. "Sir, the investors are ready for you," his secretary announced nervously from the doorway. Benjamin adjusted his $1,000 tie without turning around. Below him, the city sprawled like a chessboard where he moved pieces at will, pieces that happened to be people's homes and lives. The boardroom filled with the quiet murmur of expensive suits and calculated whispers. Benjamin entered with the confidence of a man who had never known defeat, his steel-gray eyes scanning the faces of men who hung on his every word. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice cutting through the air like a blade, "I present our most profitable venture yet." He clicked the remote, and the projection showed an aerial view of a modest neighborhood with a small building at its center. "The Sunshine Children's Shelter," he announced with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. "Prime real estate, downtown, location, perfect for our new luxury shopping center." One investor shifted uncomfortably. "Benjamin, that's a children's home. Where will they go?" Benjamin's laugh was sharp and humorless. "That's not our concern, Harrison. We're in the business of building wealth, not babysitting society's parasites." The words hung in the air like poison. Outside, protesters had already begun gathering, their signs demanding justice for the families Benjamin routinely displaced. But from his glass tower, they looked like ants, insignificant and easily crushed. "Sir," his secretary interrupted again, "there are more protesters arriving. Should we call additional security?" "Double the security," Benjamin ordered without hesitation, "and make sure they understand that nothing stops progress. Nothing." As the meeting concluded with handshakes and signatures that would destroy dozens of innocent lives, Benjamin felt the familiar rush of power. He had built his fortune on the principle that compassion was weakness, that sentiment was the enemy of success. But as he stood alone in his office that evening, watching the city lights twinkle below like fallen stars, Benjamin Hartwell had no idea that his carefully constructed world was about to collide with a force more powerful than all his money and influence combined. The innocent wisdom of a child who would change everything. Benjamin's fingers drummed impatiently against his mahogany desk as he stared at the mysterious document that could make or break his biggest deal yet. The morning light filtered through his office windows, casting shadows across the ancient Korean text that had become his greatest obstacle. $50 million, he muttered to himself, the words tasting like both victory and frustration. 50 million hanging on some chicken scratch from centuries ago. His client, Mr. Park from Seoul, had been crystal clear: no translation of the historical property contract, no deal. The document supposedly contained the legal foundation for a massive real estate acquisition in downtown Seoul. But it was written in classical Korean that might as well have been hieroglyphics to Benjamin. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Hartwell, Dr. James Parker is here. He's the third translator this week." "Send him in," Benjamin growled, loosening his tie. 3 so-called experts had already failed him. Dr. Rebecca Wang from the university had stammered through half the document before admitting defeat. Professor Martinez, supposedly fluent in ancient Asian languages, had lasted 20 minutes before declaring the text impossibly archaic. Dr. Parker entered with the nervous energy of a man who knew his reputation preceded him. "Mr. Hartwell, I've reviewed the preliminary photos you sent. This is indeed challenging, but I believe." "I don't want to hear what you believe," Benjamin interrupted, sliding the document across his desk. "I want results. Asterisk, my Korean client flies back to Seoul tomorrow morning. If this deal falls through, because of your incompetence." The threat hung unfinished in the air. Dr. Parker's hands trembled slightly as he examined the faded text through his magnifying glass. Minutes ticked by. Benjamin's patience evaporated like morning mist, while he demanded, "The characters are there from the Joseon dynasty period. Some of these grammatical structures haven't been used in over 400 years. I would need weeks of research, consultations with colleagues in Seoul." "I don't have weeks." Benjamin slammed his palm on the desk, making Dr. Parker jump. "I have 18 hours. The translator's face went pale. Mr. Hartwell, with all due respect, this level of classical Korean requires specialized knowledge that perhaps only a handful of scholars worldwide possess. The complexity is extraordinary. Then find me one of those scholars. Benjamin's voice echoed off the office walls. I don't care if you have to wake up every professor from here to Tokyo. Money is no object. Dr. Parker gathered his materials hastily. I'll make some calls, but I must warn you, the only warning I want to hear is that you've found someone who can read this thing. Benjamin's eyes blazed with the fury of a man unaccustomed to obstacles. Because I swear, I'd give my $10 million mansion to anyone who could crack this code. The words escaped his lips before he could stop them. Casual boast, born of frustration and arrogance. Dr. Parker nodded quickly and hurried from the office, leaving Benjamin alone with the mysterious document that held his fortune hostage. As he stared at the incomprehensible symbols, Benjamin had no idea that his careless promise would soon return to haunt him in ways he never imagined. The tension in Benjamin's conference room was thick enough to cut with a knife as three of the city's most respected language experts sat around the polished table, each desperately trying to salvage their professional dignity. Dr. James Parker adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses for the 10th time, while Professor Sarah Chen from the university nervously shuffled through her research notes. Michael Torres, the freelance translator who had built his reputation on impossible jobs, stared at the document with growing dread. Gentlemen and lady, Benjamin began, his voice dripping with sarcasm as he paced behind them like a predator stalking wounded prey. 3 PhDs, 2 published authors, and 1 so-called miracle worker. Yet here we sit, 12 hours before my client's departure, and none of you can manage to read a simple piece of paper. Dr. Parker cleared his throat nervously. Mr. Hartwell, as I explained earlier, this particular dialect of classical Korean, save the excuses. Benjamin cut him off brutally. You came here claiming expertise. You took my money. Now deliver results or admit your frauds. Professor Chen's face flushed red with humiliation. Sir, we're not frauds. This document uses linguistic structures that predate most modern Korean dictionaries. The complexity. Benjamin's laugh was cruel and sharp. You people hide behind big words and fancy degrees, but when it comes to actual work, you're useless. I've seen janitors with more practical skills than you so-called intellectuals. Michael Torres tried a different approach. Mr. Hartwell, perhaps, if we worked together, pooled our knowledge, pool your ignorance. You mean? Benjamin leaned over the table, his presence intimidating and aggressive. I'm paying each of you premium rates to do a job. Instead, I'm watching a circus act of incompetent academics making excuses. The 3 translators exchanged uncomfortable glances. Years of education and professional achievement meant nothing under Benjamin's withering assault. Dr. Parker's hands shook as he pointed to a particular section of the text. This character here, it could mean responsibility or burden depending on the context, but without understanding the full legal framework, could mean, Benjamin's voice rose to a roar, could mean, I don't pay for guesswork. I need certainty. I need answers. What I don't need is 3 overpaid professors telling me what words could mean while my $50 million deal evaporates. Professor Chen fought back tears of frustration and embarrassment. Michael Torres stared at his hands, his confidence shattered. Dr. Parker removed his glasses and rubbed his tired eyes, defeated. You know what this proves? Benjamin continued his assault, savoring their discomfort like fine wine. It proves that all your fancy degrees are worthless pieces of paper. You've spent years in ivory towers studying theories while the real world passes you by. You're parasites feeding off the education system, stealing money from students and clients with promises you can't keep. The silence that followed was deafening. 3 brilliant minds, reduced to feeling like failures by a man who measured worth only in dollars and dominance. None of them noticed the slight movement in the supply closet where small fingers pushed the door open just a crack, and curious eyes watched the entire humiliating scene unfold. Luna Mitchell pressed her small body against the back wall of the supply closet, her heart hammering so loudly she was certain everyone in the conference room could hear it. At 8 years old, she had learned that being invisible was often the difference between safety and danger, between having a place to sleep and spending the night on cold streets. She had slipped into the Hartwell Tower that morning by following a group of cleaning staff through the service entrance, Her worn sneakers made no sound on the marble floors as she explored the gleaming corridors, searching for anyone who might listen to her desperate plea for a real family. The Hope House shelter where she'd lived for the past 6 months was closing next week. Mrs. Rodriguez, the kind woman who ran it, had explained with tears in her eyes that they were being forced to move because the building was being sold. Luna didn't understand all the grown-up words, but she knew what it meant. She would be moving again, to another temporary place with strangers, who would try to be nice but could never be her real family. Through the crack in the closet door, Luna watched the mean man in the expensive suit yell at the 3 people sitting at the big table. Their faces looked the way hers felt, most daisy small and hurt, and trying not to cry. She didn't like how the man's voice got louder and meaner with every word. But then she saw the paper on the table, and her breath caught in her throat. The strange, beautiful characters dancing across the page were as familiar to her as her own. Reflection. Korean, the language that had once meant safety and love, and bedtime stories whispered in gentle voices. The language that Mr. and Mrs. Park had taught her during the 2 happiest years of her life, when she was 5 and 6, and believed she had found her forever family. Luna's small fingers traced invisible Korean characters in the air as she remembered. Mrs. Park's patient voice, Luna, yeah, this character means family, this one means home, and this very special one means promise that cannot be broken. The Parks had been university professors, and they had shared their love of their heritage with Luna, teaching her not just modern Korean but the classical forms used in ancient poetry and historical documents. They had called her their little scholar and promised she would always be their daughter. But promises could be broken, Luna had learned. When the Parks' visas expired and they had to return to Seoul, Luna couldn't go with them. The adoption process had taken too long, the paperwork too complicated. She had watched their car disappear around the corner, taking with it the only parents she had ever known and the language that connected her to their love. Now, 2 years later, listening to the cruel man mock these educated adults for their inability to read what she understood perfectly, Luna felt something stir inside her chest. It wasn't just recognition of the Korean text, it was the memory of being valued, of being smart, of being wanted. The mean man was still yelling, still saying terrible things about the people who couldn't help him. But Luna could help. She could read every single character on that page. The question was, did she dare reveal herself to try? The closet door creaked. It was the smallest sound, barely audible above Benjamin's continued tirade. But the building's security chief, Marcus Williams, had ears trained by 20 years of military service. His head snapped toward the supply closet, just as a tiny figure tried to shrink back into the shadows. "Hey!" Marcus's voice boomed across the conference room. "What the hell?" In 3 quick strides, he yanked open the closet door and dragged out a small girl with tangled brown hair and clothes that had seen too many washings. Luna's thin frame seemed even smaller in Marcus's massive grip as he hauled her into the bright lights of the conference room. "I found a little spy, Mr. Hartwell," Marcus announced, his voice mixing pride and disgust. "Been hiding in there listening to your private meeting." Benjamin's fury shifted instantly from the translators to this new target. His face darkened as he took in Luna's appearance, the faded jeans with patches on the knees, the oversized sweater that had clearly belonged to someone else first, the worn sneakers held together with duct tape. "A street rat," he snarled, advancing on Luna like a wolf cornering prey. "Breaking into my building, stealing from my supply closet, eavesdropping on confidential business." Luna's brown eyes were wide with terror, but she forced herself to stand, as tall as her small frame would allow. "I wasn't stealing anything, sir. I was just what? Planning which office supplies to grab on your way out." Benjamin's voice grew louder with each word. "Marcus, call building security, then call the police. I want this little criminal arrested for trespassing and attempted theft. Please." "No." Luna's voice cracked with desperation. The thought of police, of more questions, of being dragged back to another temporary placement, filled her with panic. "I can help you. I can help with the Korean paper." The room fell silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning. Benjamin stared at her for a moment, then threw back his head and laughed, a sound so harsh and cruel that Dr. Parker winced. "You hear that?" Benjamin addressed the 3 translators, his voice dripping with mock amazement. "A dirty little street kid thinks she can do what 3 PhD holders can't manage. This is perfect. This is absolutely perfect. He turned back to Luna, his eyes glittering with malicious amusement. You know what, kid? This is your lucky day. See these 3 so-called experts. They're supposedly the best language scholars money can buy, and they can't read one simple document. But you, he gestured dramatically, you think you can solve my problem? Luna nodded frantically, tears threatening to spill down her cheeks. Yes, sir, I can read Korean. I lived with a Korean family. They taught me. They taught you. Benjamin's laughter grew even more vicious. Oh, this gets better and better. Tell you what, little genius, if you can actually translate that document, I'll give you my mansion. My $10 million mansion. How's that sound? The translators stared in horror at Benjamin's cruelty. Professor Chen started to speak, but Benjamin silenced her with a look. But when you fail, he continued, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper, when you waste my time with your childish fantasies, you're going straight to juvenile detention for breaking and entering. Luna's hands trembled as she looked at the document on the table, then back at Benjamin's cold, predatory smile. Everything depended on the next few minutes. Luna's small hands trembled as she approached the conference table. Her worn sneakers, silent on the polished marble floor, the 3 translators watched her with a mixture of pity and dread, knowing they were about to witness a child's humiliation at the hands of a man who seemed to enjoy cruelty as a sport. Benjamin pulled out his phone, grinning like a predator who had cornered wounded prey. This is going to be hilarious, he announced, starting to record. Wait until my friends see this a homeless kid trying to outsmart university professors. This'll go viral for sure. Dr. Parker shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Mr. Hartwell, perhaps we shouldn't shut up. Parker, Benjamin snapped without taking his eyes off Luna. You had your chance and failed miserably. Now it's showtime for our little street scholar here. Luna reached for the document with hands that shook so badly she could barely grasp the paper. The ancient Korean characters seemed to swim before her eyes as the weight of everyone's stares pressed down on her like a physical force. She could feel Benjamin's phone camera recording her every move, capturing what he expected to be her failure and humiliation. Take your time, genius, Benjamin taunted, his voice dripping with sarcasm. I know reading is hard when you haven't been to school in months, or maybe years. Do they even teach reading in whatever cardboard box you've been living in? Michael Torres clenched his fists, fighting the urge to defend the child. But Benjamin's reputation for destroying careers kept him silent. Professor Chen bit her lip so hard she tasted blood, her heart breaking for this brave little girl, who was about to be crushed by a monster in an expensive suit. Luna closed her eyes for a moment, and suddenly she was 6 years old again, sitting in Mrs. Park's warm kitchen, while gentle hands guided her through the elegant strokes of Korean characters. She could almost hear Mrs. Park's patient voice. Remember, Lunia, each character tells a story. Listen to what they're saying to you. Opening her eyes, Luna began to read silently, her lips moving slightly as she processed the ancient text. Seconds ticked by, then minutes. Benjamin's grin grew wider with each passing moment. What's wrong, little professor? He mocked. Cat, got your tongue? Or maybe you're finally realizing you bit off more than you can chew. But something had changed in Luna's posture. Her trembling had stopped. Her breathing had steadied. The fear in her eyes was being replaced by something else: recognition, understanding, and a growing confidence that made the adults in the room hold their breath. Suddenly, Luna looked up from the document, and when she spoke, her voice was clear, strong, and filled with the perfect pronunciation of someone who had learned Korean, not from textbooks, but from love. She said, the words flowing like music, 1392. The effect was instantaneous and electric. Benjamin's phone nearly slipped from his suddenly nerveless fingers. Dr. Parker's mouth fell open in shock. Professor Chen gasped audibly, recognizing not just fluent Korean, but the precise classical pronunciation that scholars spent years trying to master. The little girl who had been cowering in fear moments before now stood tall, speaking in ancient language with the confidence of a native speaker. And the silence in the room was deafening. The silence stretched on as Luna continued reading, her young voice carrying the weight of centuries-old wisdom. The Korean words flowed from her lips like a river finding its natural course, each syllable pronounced with precision that made Professor Chun's years of study seem inadequate. This document, Luna said, switching seamlessly to English, is a land ownership contract from 1392, during the early Joseon dynasty. It establishes the legal obligations of landowners toward the community, specifically regarding the care of orphaned children and displaced families. Benjamin's face had gone completely white. The phone in his hand trembled as he struggled to process what he was hearing. A 8-year-old homeless girl was not only reading classical Korean with perfect fluency, but translating complex legal terminology that had stumped 3 PhD holders. Dr. Parker leaned forward, his voice barely a whisper. That's impossible. The grammatical structures she's identifying haven't been used in modern Korean for over 4 centuries. Luna looked up at him with the innocent confidence of childhood. Mrs. Park taught me that classical Korean is like a key to understanding our ancestors' hearts. This contract says that anyone who owns land has a sacred duty to provide shelter for children who have nowhere to go. The irony hit the room like a physical blow. Benjamin was using a document about social responsibility toward orphans to finalize a deal that would destroy children's shelter. The ancient Korean text was literally condemning his entire business model. The specific clause here, Luna continued, pointing to a section that had mystified all 3 translators, states that those who prosper from the earth must serve as guardians to those whom the earth cannot shelter. It means rich people should take care of homeless children, not hurt them. Professor Chun's voice cracked with emotion. My God, she's right. Every character, every inflection. I recognize these terms from my doctoral research, but I could never pronounce them properly. How is this possible? Michael Torres stared at Luna in amazement. The linguistic complexity alone. This level of classical Korean would require years of intensive study with native speakers who specialize in historical texts. Benjamin felt his carefully constructed world tilting on its axis. This child, this dirty, homeless, supposedly worthless child, possessed knowledge that his money couldn't buy and his power couldn't command. She had accomplished in minutes what his experts couldn't manage in days. The final section, Luna said, her small finger tracing the ancient characters, talks about karma. It says that those who ignore their duty to protect the helpless will find their own prosperity built on sand. Their wealth will crumble because it has no foundation of compassion. The words hung in the air like a prophecy. Benjamin looked down, and Luna really looked at her for the first time and saw not a street rat or a parasite, but a brilliant child whose potential he had dismissed based on her appearance and circumstances. For the first time in his adult life, Benjamin Hartwell felt genuinely ashamed. Mr. Hartwell, Dr. Parker said quietly, this child has just provided a translation that will revolutionize our understanding of Joseon dynasty property law. Her knowledge is extraordinary. Benjamin's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. He had built his fortune on the belief that worth was measured in dollars and status. That intelligence came from expensive schools and proper breeding. But here stood living proof that wisdom could emerge from the most unexpected places. That brilliance didn't require privilege, and he had promised her his mansion. The conference room felt charged with electricity, as all eyes remained fixed on Luna. Professor Chen was the first to break the stunned silence, her academic curiosity overriding her shock. Sweetheart, she said gently, kneeling down to Luna's eye level. Where did you learn to read classical Korean like that? That level of fluency, it's remarkable. Luna's confidence wavered slightly as the attention shifted to her personal story. She glanced nervously at Benjamin, whose face had gone from cruel amusement to something she couldn't quite identify, surprise, mixed with something that might have been respect. I lived with the Park family, Luna began, her voice soft but clear. Mr. and Mrs. Park were professors at the university before they had to go back to Korea. They wanted to adopt me. Dr. Parker leaned forward intently. When was this? How long were you with them? From when I was 5 until I was 7, Luna replied, unconsciously straightening her shoulders as she remembered happier times. Almost 2 years. Mrs. Park taught Korean literature, and Mr. Park specialized in historical documents. They said I was their little scholar, because I learned so fast. Michael Torres shook his head in amazement. 2 years of intensive classical Korean instruction from university professors would explain the linguistic foundation. But your pronunciation, your understanding of context. Luna's eyes brightened with the memory. They didn't just teach me words, they taught me stories. Every character has a history, Mrs. Park said. She would read me ancient poems before bed, and Mr. Park would show me old contracts and letters, explaining how our ancestors thought and felt. Benjamin found himself drawn into the story, despite his emotional turmoil. What happened to them? For the first time, Luna's composure cracked slightly. Their visas expired. The adoption paperwork was taking too long, and the government said they had to leave. They cried when they said goodbye. Mrs. Park promised they would come back for me when they figured out how to fix the papers. But, she shrugged with the heartbreaking acceptance that only children forced to grow up too fast could manage. That was 2 years ago, she continued. I've been in different foster homes and shelters since then. I practice my Korean at the public library because I don't want to forget them. Sometimes I write letters to Mrs. Park in Korean, but I don't know where to send them. Professor Chen wiped away a tear. You've maintained fluency in classical Korean for 2 years without formal instruction. That's extraordinary dedication. I had to, Luna said simply. It's the only thing I have left of them. When I read Korean, I can hear Mrs. Park's voice again. The room fell silent as the adults processed this revelation. Here was a child who had clung to an ancient language as her last connection to love and family, who had turned that desperate preservation of memory into a skill that had just solved Benjamin's impossible problem. Benjamin stared at Luna with growing realization. He had spent the morning mocking these translators for their inability to decode the document. But this child had done more than translate words. She had bridged centuries, connecting the wisdom of ancient Korea to the present moment with perfect understanding, and the message of that ancient document was now impossible to ignore. Those with wealth and power had a sacred duty to protect the vulnerable, especially children like Luna. The promise he had made in arrogant jest suddenly felt like the weight of destiny pressing down on his shoulders. Benjamin stared at Luna as the magnitude of the situation crashed over him like a tsunami. The silence in the conference room was deafening, broken only by the distant hum of traffic 52 floors below. His world built on the foundation that money equaled worth. That power meant superiority had just been shattered by an 8-year-old girl in second-hand clothes. You did it, he whispered, the words barely audible. You actually did it. Michael Torres cleared his throat nervously. Mr. Hartwell, about your promise. My promise. Benjamin's voice was hollow as he repeated the words. He looked around the room at the 3 witnesses who had heard him declare he would give his $10 million mansion to anyone who could translate the document. The promise had been recorded on his own phone, a video that could destroy him if it went public. Dr. Parker adjusted his glasses uncomfortably. Sir, legally speaking, a verbal contract made in front of witnesses. I know what I said. Benjamin's voice cracked with a mixture of rage and disbelief. I said it to humiliate you people, to show how impossible this task was. I never imagined. He gestured helplessly toward Luna, who watched him with wide, uncertain eyes. Professor Chen spoke up, her voice firm despite her earlier intimidation. Mr. Hartwell, this child has just accomplished something remarkable. She's demonstrated knowledge that would impress scholars worldwide. Your promise was made publicly, in good faith. Good faith. Benjamin laughed bitterly. It was a joke, a sarcastic comment made in frustration. You can't seriously expect me to give a mansion to a... He stopped himself before the cruel words escaped, but the damage was already done. Luna's face crumpled slightly, and she took a step backward. Michael Torres had quietly been recording the conversation on his phone since Luna began translating. Mr. Hartwell, this story, a homeless child solving what experts couldn't, demonstrating extraordinary intelligence despite her circumstances. This is exactly the kind of human interest piece that resonates with people, especially when it involves a wealthy businessman's promise. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Benjamin's face went from pale to red as he realized his reputation, his business dealings. Everything he had built could be destroyed by his own arrogance. Social media would tear him apart. The headlines wrote themselves. Billionaire CEO refuses to honor promise to homeless genius child. This is blackmail, he snarled. This is justice. Professor Chen replied quietly. This little girl accomplished the impossible, and you made a promise. The fact that you underestimated her doesn't invalidate that promise. Benjamin looked at Luna, really looked at her, and saw something that terrified him more than any business rival or legal challenge ever had. He saw intelligence that had flourished despite abandonment, dignity that poverty couldn't touch, and a hope in her eyes that his cruelty hadn't completely extinguished. For 45 years, Benjamin had measured people by their bank accounts, their connections, their usefulness to him. He had built an empire by dismissing anyone who couldn't immediately prove their worth in dollars and cents. Yet here stood a child who possessed something money couldn't be, a brilliant mind, shaped by love and refined by loss. The document, Luna said quietly, breaking into his thoughts. The part about karma says that when powerful people ignore their duties, the universe finds a way to teach them what really matters. Benjamin's hands trembled as the full weight of cosmic irony settled on him. He had been undone not by a competitor or a market crash, but by his own words and a homeless child's extraordinary gift. He was cornered, defeated, and for the first time in his life, completely powerless. The executive elevator descended in silence as Benjamin rode alone to the parking garage, his reflection staring back at him from the polished steel doors like an accusation. The weight of the day's events pressed down on him with suffocating intensity. In a matter of hours, his carefully constructed identity had been demolished by a child who weighed less than his monthly wine budget. His Bentley's leather seats felt cold against his back as he sat motionless in the driver's seat, unable to bring himself to start the engine. The underground garage was dimly lit and eerily quiet, providing the perfect backdrop for the most brutal self-examination of his life. 45 years, he whispered to the empty car. 45 years of being absolutely certain I knew how the world worked. But did he? Benjamin closed his eyes and allowed himself to truly think about his life's work for the first time. The demolished neighborhoods flashed through his mind like a grotesque slideshow. The Martinez family, evicted just last month, so he could build luxury condos where were their 3 children sleeping tonight. The elderly couple who had run a corner grocery store for 30 years before his urban renewal project forced them out had they found another place to call home. For decades, Benjamin had dismissed these people as obstacles to progress, necessary casualties in the war for profit. He had convinced himself that he was improving communities, that his gleaming towers and upscale developments were somehow noble achievements. But Luna's translation of that ancient document had stripped away all his justifications, leaving him face to face with an uncomfortable truth. He had built his fortune on the suffering of the vulnerable. The irony was devastating. While he sat in boardrooms making decisions that destroyed families, Luna had been moving from shelter to shelter, carrying the wisdom of ancient Korea in her young mind like a sacred flame. She had preserved something beautiful and meaningful despite having nothing, while he had accumulated everything while destroying what mattered most. Benjamin thought about his mansion, $10 million of marble and gold, automated systems, and imported fixtures. He lived alone in 23 rooms, eating catered meals in a dining room designed for entertaining guests he never invited. When was the last time those walls had heard laughter? When had that house ever felt like a home? Luna probably shared a bedroom with 3 other children in whatever shelter would take her. She owned nothing but the clothes on her back and memories of a family that had loved her for 2 precious years. Yet when she spoke about the parks, her face had glowed with a warmth that Benjamin couldn't remember ever feeling. She has something I lost, he admitted to the darkness. Something I threw away so long ago, I forgot it ever existed. His phone buzzed with messages from business associates, stock alerts, meeting reminders, the constant digital noise of a life built on accumulation and acquisition, but for the first time, none of it seemed important. What was the point of owning half the city if you had no one to share it with? What was the value of respect built on fear rather than love? Luna's words echoed in his mind. The part about karma says that when powerful people ignore their duties, the universe finds a way to teach them what really matters. Perhaps this wasn't just about a promise or a translation. Perhaps this was the universe's way of offering him something he had never thought to want. A chance at redemption. Benjamin started the engine and pulled out of the garage. But instead of heading toward his empty mansion, he found himself driving toward the part of town where people like Luna lived, the part of town he had spent years trying to erase. Benjamin's Bentley looked absurdly out of place, parked outside the Hope House shelter, its pristine silver paint gleaming under the flickering streetlight like a spaceship that had landed in the wrong world. He sat in the driver's seat for 10 minutes, gathering courage he didn't know he possessed, watching through Rain Street windows as the reality of Luna's world came into sharp focus. The shelter was a converted church building, its red brick facade weathered by decades of harsh winters and harsh circumstances. A small sign hung crookedly by the entrance, Hope House, temporary housing for children in need. The word temporary seemed to mock every child who had ever called this place home. Benjamin had brought his attorney, Rebecca Walsh, a specialist in child welfare law, who had arrived within an hour of his panicked phone call. She sat beside him now, reviewing documents with the efficiency of someone accustomed to complex legal situations. "Mr. Hartwell," she said, without looking up from her tablet, "I need to be absolutely clear about the limitations here. An 8-year-old child cannot legally own real estate. What you're proposing, transferring a $10 million property to a minor, requires establishing a legal trust fund with court approval and ongoing supervision." "Then do it," Benjamin replied, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "Whatever it takes." She earned it. Rebecca looked at him carefully. "This will require extensive documentation, character references, psychological evaluations, and ongoing court oversight. Are you prepared for that level of scrutiny into your personal life and motivations?" Benjamin thought about the question. Seriously, was he ready to have social workers and court officials examining his past, questioning his sudden change of heart? Was he prepared to have his business practices scrutinized by people whose job was to protect children from men exactly like him? "Yes," he said finally. "I made a promise." She kept her part of the bargain. The shelter's interior was nothing like Benjamin's sterile corporate environments. Mismatched furniture donated by various churches and community groups filled the common area. Children's artwork covered every available wall, space-crayon drawings of families that existed only in dreams. Houses with smoke curling from chimneys, stick figures holding hands under bright yellow suns. Mrs. Rodriguez, the shelter director, was a woman in her 50s whose tired eyes had seen too many children come and go. She listened to Benjamin's explanation with the wariness of someone who had learned to expect disappointment from authority figures. "Mr. Hartwell," she said slowly, "Luna is a special child, but she's also been through significant trauma. She's been abandoned twice, first by her birth family, then by the parks when they were forced to leave. She's learned to hope carefully, if you understand what I mean." Benjamin nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. "I understand, but I made a promise, and she deserves to have someone keep their word to her." "Keeping your word means more than just money," Mrs. Rodriguez continued. "This child needs stability, consistency, love. She needs someone who will be there when she has nightmares about being abandoned again. Are you prepared for that?" The question hit Benjamin harder than any business challenge he had ever faced. Was he prepared to be a father figure? Could a man who had spent decades destroying families learn to build one? "I don't know," he admitted honestly, "but I want to try. She taught me something today that I had forgotten, that worth isn't measured in dollars, and that some promises are more important than profit margins." An hour later, papers were signed establishing the Luna Mitchell Trust Fund with $10 million set aside for her education, care, and future needs. Benjamin also committed to converting his mansion into a residential facility for children aging out of the foster system, with Luna as the first resident and a voice in how the facility would be run. As they prepared to leave, Luna appeared in the doorway, still wearing the same patched jeans and oversized sweater from earlier. She looked smaller in the dim lighting of the shelter, more vulnerable than she had seemed in the gleaming conference room. "Is it real?" she asked quietly. "You're really going to keep your promise?" Benjamin knelt down to her eye level, seeing his reflection in her hopeful brown eyes. "It's real, Luna, and I'm going to do more than just keep my promise. I'm going to learn from you what it means to care about people more than money." For the first time that day, Luna smiled, a genuine, radiant expression that transformed her entire face. And for the first time in years, Benjamin felt something warm and unfamiliar stirring in his chest. It felt like hope. The storm hit Benjamin's empire like a hurricane making landfall. By 9 a.m. the next morning, his executive conference room buzzed with the angry voices of vice presidents, department heads, and board members who had been summoned by an emergency call from Margaret Stone, his chief operating officer. Margaret stood at the head of the table like a general preparing for war, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun that matched her expression. At 58, she had climbed the corporate ladder by being more ruthless than the men around her, and she had no intention of watching Benjamin's mental breakdown destroy everything she had helped build. "Ladies and gentlemen," Margaret began, her voice cutting through the chatter like a blade, "we have a crisis. Our CEO has apparently suffered some form of psychological episode that has led him to make financially catastrophic decisions involving a homeless child." Robert Chen, the head of acquisitions, leaned forward with concern. "Margaret, What exactly are we talking about here? $10 million, Margaret replied, letting the number hang in the air like a death sentence. Benjamin has established a trust fund for an 8-year-old girl he met yesterday, and he's committed to converting his personal mansion into some kind of charity facility. He's also talking about restructuring our entire business model to focus on affordable housing. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. David Park from legal shook his head in disbelief. This could trigger a fiduciary duty investigation if the board believes Benjamin is no longer acting in the shareholders' best interests. Exactly, Margaret said, her eyes gleaming with opportunity. Which is why I've already contacted Harrison and Associates to begin preliminary discussions about leadership transition options. Meanwhile, 3 floors up in his office, Benjamin was discovering that keeping promises to children was significantly more complicated than making billion-dollar deals. Rebecca Walsh sat across from his desk, surrounded by stacks of legal documents that seemed to multiply every time he looked away. The State Department of Children and Family Services has opened a formal investigation, Rebecca explained, her voice professionally neutral. They want to understand why a wealthy businessman with no previous charitable history has suddenly taken interest in a specific child. Benjamin's stomach tightened. They think I have inappropriate motives. They think you have unexplained motives, Rebecca corrected, which, from their perspective, amounts to the same thing. Child protection services exist because adults often have complex reasons for wanting access to vulnerable children. The irony wasn't lost on Benjamin. He was being investigated for wanting to help Luna, while his years of destroying children's homes had never attracted any official scrutiny. What do they need from me? Complete financial disclosure, psychological evaluation, character references, background checks, and a detailed explanation of how this arrangement serves Luna's best interests rather than your own. Rebecca paused. They're also requiring supervised visits only until the investigation concludes. Benjamin's phone buzzed constantly with calls from business reporters who had somehow gotten wind of the story. The business channel was already running a segment titled Hartwell's Mysterious Charity, Midlife Crisis, or Genuine Change. Social media was exploding with speculation, memes, and hot takes about wealthy CEOs and their motivations. "Sir," his secretary announced through the intercom, "the IRS is on line 3. They want to discuss the unusual financial movements in your accounts." Rebecca sighed. "Moving $10 million to establish a trust for a minor you met yesterday has apparently triggered several automated fraud detection systems. The IRS, the SEC, and the Treasury Department all have questions. But the worst was yet to come." At 2 p.m., Margaret Stone knocked on Benjamin's door with a formal letter from the board of directors. "Benjamin," she said, her voice carrying the false sympathy of a predator closing in for the kill, "the board has voted to place you on administrative leave pending a full evaluation of your mental fitness to serve as CEO." Benjamin read the letter twice, feeling the corporate empire he had built turning against him like antibodies attacking an infection. "You're staging a coup." "We're protecting the company," Margaret replied smoothly. "Your behavior yesterday suggests you may be suffering from stress-induced psychological issues. The board simply wants to ensure you receive the help you need while protecting our shareholders from potentially damaging decisions. And I suppose you're volunteering to serve as interim CEO during this evaluation." Margaret's smile was sharp as a knife. Someone has to maintain stability during this transition period. As Margaret left his office, Benjamin realized he was no longer fighting for a business deal or a profit margin. He was fighting for something far more important, his right to become the man Luna had inspired him to be. The war for his soul had begun, and he was vastly outnumbered. 18 months. That's how long it took for Benjamin to learn that transformation wasn't a single moment of inspiration, but a grinding, exhausting battle fought one day at a time against forces both external and internal that resisted change. The corporate warfare had been brutal and public. Margaret Stone's attempted coup had failed, but barely. Benjamin had been forced to liquidate personal assets, hire an army of lawyers, and endure 6 months of psychological evaluations that probed every corner of his psyche. The media circus had been relentless, with business reporters dissecting his every move and social media influencers turning his story into content for their followers. The stock price dropped 30% during the restructuring announcement, reported James Mitchell, his new chief financial officer, a man who specialized in ethical business transformations, but the government contracts for affordable housing have started coming in. The Arlington project alone is worth $40 million over 3 years. Benjamin nodded from behind his smaller desk in his smaller office. He had moved Hartwell Properties out of the gleaming tower into a modest building where the overhead was lower and the mission was clearer. The walls were covered with architectural plans for low-income housing projects rather than luxury developments. "Any word from the state about Luna's placement?" Benjamin asked, though he tried to keep the anxiety out of his voice. "The final home study is scheduled for next week," replied Sarah Chen, the social worker assigned to oversee the transition. "The renovations on the mansion are complete, and the staff has been approved. Luna will be the first resident, but she won't be alone. We have applications from 6 other children aging out of foster care." The mansion conversion had been a nightmare of permits, inspections, and bureaucratic red tape. Benjamin had learned more about child safety regulations, trauma-informed care, and educational support systems than he had ever wanted to know. Every bathroom had to be redesigned for safety, every window needed proper locks, and every staff member required extensive background checks and training. But the hardest part had been learning to be patient with Luna herself. "Mr. Benjamin," Luna had said during one of their supervised visits, using the formal address the social workers had taught her, "why do you want to help me?" "Mrs. Rodriguez says sometimes adults have bad reasons for being nice to kids." The question had hit him like a physical blow. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that she had accidentally saved your soul? How do you convince a child who had been abandoned twice that this time was different? "Because you taught me something important," he had answered honestly. "You showed me that smart doesn't always look the way I thought it would, and that people deserve respect no matter where they live or how much money they have." Luna had studied his face with the intensity of a child who had learned early to read adult emotions for signs of danger. "Are you going to leave when it gets hard?" "No," Benjamin had promised, knowing that this was the most important commitment he would ever make. "I'm not going anywhere." Now, as winter rain streaked the windows of his new office, Benjamin reflected on how that promise had been tested dozens of times. There had been nights when Luna woke up screaming from nightmares about being abandoned again. There had been days when the legal bills and bureaucratic obstacles made him question whether this path was worth the cost. There had been moments when he wondered if a man who had spent decades destroying families could really learn to build one. But there had also been breakthroughs. Luna's first genuine laugh during a supervised visit to the zoo. Her excitement when she saw her new bedroom in the converted mansion, the day she had corrected his pronunciation of a Korean word with gentle patience instead of fear. "The therapy sessions are helping," Sarah Chen continued. "Luna's attachment issues are improving, and she's starting to trust that stability is possible. The trauma specialist says she's making remarkable progress." Benjamin nodded, remembering his own therapy sessions, court-mandated evaluations that had become voluntary exploration of his own childhood wounds. He had learned that his cruelty toward others had roots in his father's cruelty toward him, that his obsession with wealth stemmed from growing up poor and powerless. Understanding didn't excuse his past behavior, but it helped him choose different responses to stress and frustration. "The board meeting is tomorrow," James Mitchell reminded him. "They want to review the quarterly numbers and the long-term projections for the Affordable Housing Initiative." Benjamin smiled grimly. "Let them review. We're profitable, we're growing, and we're actually making people's lives better instead of worse. If that's not enough for them, they can find another CEO." It had taken 18 months, but Benjamin Hartwell was finally becoming the man he was meant to be. 2 years after the document that changed everything, Benjamin stood in the lobby of the newly opened Hartwell Community Center, watching Luna cut the ribbon with oversized scissors while a small crowd of residents, city officials, and former skeptics applauded. At 10 years old, she had grown taller and more confident, though she still unconsciously reached for his hand during public events. "This building used to be where rich people lived," Luna said into the microphone, her voice clear and strong. "But now it's where kids like me can have a real home and learn new things." Mr. Benjamin says, "That's what buildings should do, help people instead of making them sad." The applause was genuine, and Benjamin felt a warmth in his chest that no business deal had ever provided. The former mansion now housed 15 children between the ages of 8 and 17, along with a full-time staff of counselors, tutors, and life skills coaches. The transformation hadn't been cosmetic. Every room had been redesigned around the the needs of young people who had experienced trauma and abandonment. Dr. Patricia Williams, the center's director, approached Benjamin with her quarterly report. "The integration program is exceeding all expectations," she said quietly. 12 of our first residents have moved on to independent living situations or long-term foster placements. Luna's progress has been remarkable. Her attachment issues have largely resolved, and she's testing to grade levels ahead in most subjects. Benjamin watched Luna demonstrate the center's new computer lab to a group of visiting donors. She moved through the room with the confidence of someone who finally believed she belonged somewhere. The frightened, dirty child from his conference room had blossomed into a bright, articulate young girl who served as both resident and unofficial ambassador for the program. "The city wants to discuss expanding the model," Dr. Williams continued. "3 other developers have inquired about partnering with us on similar projects. Your approach to profitable social responsibility is attracting national attention." The attention was mostly positive now, though it had taken time. Business magazines that had once celebrated Benjamin's ruthless efficiency now featured him in articles about conscious capitalism and sustainable community development. The transition hadn't been easy on his bank account. His personal net worth had dropped from $800 million to roughly $200 million. But the new business model was proving surprisingly lucrative. Mr. Hartwell called Maria Santos, a reporter from the local newspaper. "Can you tell us about the Luna Mitchell Scholarship Program?" Benjamin smiled, remembering the day Luna had asked him why other kids couldn't get the same educational opportunities she was receiving. That conversation had led to the establishment of a $50 million scholarship fund for children aging out of foster care, money that came directly from his personal assets rather than corporate accounts. "Luna taught me that talent and intelligence exist everywhere," he replied, "but opportunity doesn't. The scholarship program ensures that financial circumstances don't determine a child's potential to succeed." After the ceremony, Benjamin found Luna in the center's library, curled up in a reading chair with a book about Korean poetry. She looked up when he approached, and her smile was radiant with genuine happiness. "Mr. Benjamin," she said, "Mrs. Chen from Social Services told me the adoption papers will be final next month. Does that mean you'll really be my dad?" The question still took his breath away, even though they had discussed it dozens of times during family therapy sessions. "If that's what you want," he replied. "Are you sure you want to be stuck with me?" Luna giggled, a sound that never failed to amaze him. "You're funny. But yes, I want to be your daughter for real. Mrs. Park always said, family isn't just about blood, it's about people who choose to love each other, even when it's hard." Benjamin knelt beside her chair, thinking about the journey that had brought them to this moment. The legal battles, the psychological evaluations, the media scrutiny, the corporate restructuring, all of it had been worth reaching this point where a brilliant, resilient child wanted to call him dad. "There's something else," Luna said, suddenly, looking serious. "I've been thinking about the other kids who don't have anywhere to go. Maybe when I'm older, I can help you build more places like this." Benjamin looked into her eyes and saw not just his daughter, but his legacy. Luna had already influenced every major decision he made, from the center's design to the scholarship program's criteria. She had shown him that real success wasn't measured in quarterly profits but in lives improved and futures secured. "I think that's the best business plan I've ever heard," he said, meaning every word. Outside, the sun was setting over a neighborhood that was slowly being revitalized through careful, community-focused development. The old Benjamin would have seen dollar signs and development opportunities. The new Benjamin saw a home. 3 years had passed since Luna Mitchell first stepped out of that supply closet and changed the course of 2 lives forever. Now, on a crisp October morning, Benjamin stood at the podium of the newly constructed Luna Mitchell Foundation headquarters, looking out at an audience that included former critics, current partners, and most importantly, Luna herself, now 11 years old, and officially Luna Mitchell Hartwell. "Before I begin," Benjamin said, his voice carrying across the packed auditorium, "I want to tell you about a promise. 3 years ago, I made that promise in anger, in arrogance, never imagining it would become the most important commitment of my life." In the front row, Luna sat with perfect posture, wearing a simple blue dress and the confident smile of a child who had found her place in the world. Beside her sat Mrs. Rodriguez from Hope House, Dr. Patricia Williams from the Community Center, and dozens of other children whose lives had been touched by the Foundation's work. Today, we're announcing the establishment of the Luna Mitchell Foundation with an initial endowment of $50 million. Benjamin continued. This foundation will focus on 3 critical areas: preventing family separation, supporting children aging out of foster care, and creating sustainable models for community development that prioritize people over profit. The applause was warm and sustained, but Benjamin's attention was focused on Luna, whose eyes sparkled with pride and purpose. She had insisted on speaking at today's ceremony, and though she was still a child, her words carried the weight of lived experience. When Luna first translated that Korean document, Benjamin said, "She didn't just solve a business problem, she revealed a truth that I had spent decades avoiding, that our obligations to each other, especially to our most vulnerable children, are more important than any profit margin or quarterly report." The Korean document now hung in a place of honor in the foundation's lobby, surrounded by photos of the children who had benefited from the programs it had inspired. The ancient text about social responsibility had become a living document, its wisdom translated into modern action through scholarship programs, housing initiatives, and family preservation services. Luna approached the podium with the composure of someone twice her age, adjusting the microphone with practiced ease. 3 years ago, I was scared and alone, she began, her clear voice reaching every corner of the auditorium. I didn't have a family or a home or anyone who believed in me, except Mrs. Rodriguez and the other kids at Hope House. She paused, looking directly at Benjamin with the love and trust that had taken years to build. But sometimes the universe puts people together who need each other, even when they don't know it yet. Mr. Benjamin needed to learn that being rich doesn't mean being important, and I needed to learn that some promises really are kept. The audience was completely silent, captivated by this young girl who spoke with the wisdom of someone who had survived abandonment and found healing. All kids deserve to feel safe and loved, Luna continued. They deserve to have their talents recognized and their dreams supported. That's what this foundation is about, making sure no child has to hide in a closet, hoping someone will notice they're special. Benjamin felt tears threatening as Luna concluded her remarks and returned to her seat. The frightened, desperate child from that conference room had grown into a confident young advocate whose voice would help shape the foundation's work for years to come. As the ceremony ended and guests moved to the reception, Benjamin found himself alone with Luna in the quiet auditorium. The afternoon sun streamed through tall windows, casting golden light across the empty chairs. "Dad," Luna said the word, still sent warmth through his chest every time she used it. "Do you think Mrs. Park would be proud of what we've built?" Benjamin knelt down to Luna's eye level, taking her hands in his. "I think Mrs. Park would be amazed by the incredible young woman you're becoming. And I think she would understand that sometimes the most important promises are the ones we never expected to make." Luna hugged him tightly, and Benjamin marveled at how completely his definition of wealth had changed. His bank account was smaller, his business empire more modest, but his life was infinitely richer than it had ever been when success was measured only in dollars. The Korean document had been right about karma. When those in power ignored their duty to protect the vulnerable, the universe found a way to teach them what truly mattered. Benjamin had learned that lesson through the love of a remarkable child who had shown him that the greatest treasures in life couldn't be bought. They could only be earned through love, sacrifice, and the courage to keep promises that matter. Outside, the foundation's work was just beginning, but inside this quiet moment, father and daughter had already found everything they needed. If this story touched your heart the way it touched mine, I'd love to have you join our family here. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss these powerful stories of hope and transformation. And please, drop a comment below and tell me what moment in Benjamin and Luna's journey moved you the most. Your thoughts mean the world to me. Until our next story together, remember, sometimes the most unexpected encounters change everything. Take care, my friends.